Okay.
Okay. We're live now, and I just wanted to ask you. I said to myself, well, Facebook got like a time machine, but you can only go back in the past and present. Everything you do, you go back in the past, you can see everything you do in the past, and you can build from the present. 30 seconds. Give me a second. I'm going to shut up now.
Okay. I'm getting an echo.
You
Is that?
are?
Nope, it's gone now.
Okay. 10 seconds. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very, very special guest for the show today. He's a mathematician, and I wanted to dig into his mind and learn a little bit more about what he did in the past to bring him to the present. So, can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Yeah, so my name's Noah Healy, and I'm calling from Charlottesville, Virginia.
Wow. Okay. And thank you for joining my show. So, I initially start off with tell me about your past, present, and future.
Well, my past and present are pretty similar. I was born and raised here in Charlottesville, and I've been working on math problems basically since I became aware of math problems, and that leads me to what hopefully will be my future since I've developed a system to supersede the existing commodity financial situation, and I'm trying to upgrade economics.
Wow, yeah, I got an email from you to do like a short segment, and I did it for you because I feel like anything where you're upgrading economics or the solar, not the solar system, but the world, I'm with it. So the second question, tell me about how you entered the great prestigious University of Virginia and and you were a high school junior at that. Tell me about that story.
Well, Charlottesville is where UVA is located. And so there's a lot of educational opportunities here. There's the Curry School of Education that sends a lot of teachers over for training. And that means that the local public school system basically has a system where if you finish a course of study, they'll send you to the university or our local community college for extended classes. What happened for me was that I entered sixth grade in a year in which a long term program finally got a pilot that allowed three of us to skip seventh grade mathematics. So I took eighth grade mathematics in my seventh grade class, and then they had to sort of scramble and create a geometry class for eighth graders for a few of us. Then when I went into high school in ninth grade, my then taking 10th grade mathematics self was also the person who was teaching me was the head of the math department there, and they had a pilot program to teach 11th grade mathematics in summer school because there were a bunch of kids who were all the same age and would be entering 11th grade whose fathers were uh, professors in the math department, and their fathers wanted their sons to advance a year in mathematics. So they basically talked the high school into creating a skip a year of mathematics summer school class at the exact time I happened to be qualified to take the skip a year of mathematics summer school class. So I did that. And so that meant that in my sophomore year of high school, I was in AP calculus. And
Wow.
after you get a 5 on the AP calculus exam, there isn't any more math in high school for you. So I qualified for the continuing education program. So they they applied me as a member of the continuing education, enrolling as a part-time student at UVA, and paid my way to take one math class per semester for the final 4 semesters of my high school career.
Well said. And when you graduated finally, how was your SAT and ACT scores? Like, I know they had to be high. Did you manage to get into there with those, or was
Well, I didn't take ACTs, so I don't know what scores I might have gotten.
oh,
My SAT scores, let's see, I think I got a 780 math, 720 verbal on my SATs. I took I took them basically. There's something called the PSAT, um, and that's the qualifier for the National Merit Scholar Finalist Award.
mhm,
And that qualification the scores are pretty similar, but basically they double your math and add your verbal, and if that combined total is in the top, I think 2% of your state, then you're qualified. And then to become a National Merit finalist, you have to take a confirming SAT test that sort of shows off that that wasn't a fluke, that you got that score. And so I took the PSAT as a sophomore, I'm pretty sure, and the SAT pretty early in my junior career, and was lucky enough that there's a window after you take the PSAT that you have to have for qualifying. And while I had taken the SAT at sort of the first high school opportunity, it was inside the window, so I didn't have to take it again. It was, however, the second time I'd taken the SAT, because in seventh grade there was a program that Johns Hopkins had put together
oh,
uh,
Baltimore.
to nationally have exceptional seventh grade students, and this isn't a one-off. This is something that happens on a continuous basis. To take the SATs test to detect exceptional students, and I believe I got 1050 combo. I think I got a 580, like 470, something like that in seventh grade.
Well,
Uh,
yeah.
I then the other SAT like test at the after graduating undergraduate, I took the GRE, which is from the same testing group, and is similarly graded, but it has an extra section of the test, the
Mhm.
analytics, or I can't remember analytics. There's another section that's basically all logic problems, and so I got 790 math, 710 verbal, and 790 analytics, or whatever the name of the other one is on the GRE.
Okay. Wow. Do y'all hear that, folks? That is a good number right there. Excellent number. And then it leads me into talking about nuclear engineering, which you went to college for, your program. You were the last class to be admitted. Tell me about that.
Well, that's why I took the GRE, actually. So there was a nuclear engineering program when I first entered UVA, but that was as a continuing education. My first year as an undergraduate was the first year in which it was not possible to enter as an undergraduate in the nuclear engineering program, but they still had some of the classes lying around. And one of my instructors that I quite liked happened to be in that department. And so I followed him and took some of those classes as electives. And in order to graduate with an engineering degree at UVA, you have to write a senior thesis. And an idea that I had in that class, which was purely science fiction and had no basis in reality, was if you squinted really hard and were extremely generous to me, kind of similar to this reactor design that I had never heard of before, but it turns out is actually practical and has actually been built. Mine was not practical and could never be built. But um, the the problem that my sci-fi like theory was trying to solve actually is solved by this other design that sort of has some similar properties. And so that that teacher introduced me to the guy who became my thesis advisor. He liked my thesis. He offered me basically a free year of grad school if I could get in. So that's why I took the GRE. Uh, the one that I'm prouder of is that, much like there are subject tests,
Mhm.
so you can take, math or chemistry or science subject tests as a high school student. There are similarly GRE type subject tests,
Mhm.
and the engineering subject test is certainly the hardest test I've ever taken. I believe it was about 138 questions. I did not know this at the time, but you're actually supposed to leave most of it blank. Um, so effectively, the raw scores are multiplied by 10, and that's your final, but there's a cap at 800. So if you were to answer all 138 questions correctly, you'd get an 800. If you were to answer 80 of the questions correctly and leave 58 of them blank, you would also get an 800. Um, I answered all but two of the questions, in fact, and I think I wound up with a 7760 on that, which is sort of too high. Like you're not even supposed to answer that many questions because there's so many different kinds of engineering subjects in there. You're not supposed to
Wow.
know anything
Yeah,
about them.
yeah, yeah. So
But
what you're saying is that they're wrong. There were wrong questions that was meant to just leave blank.
well, so not so much that, it's that, so for example, the first page, I can still remember this to this day because it was so shocking. There was a like sideways diagram of a dam,
Mhm,
and a hydrostatics question, and then there was like a diagram of a bridge and another type of civil engineering question. But then there was like an electrical circuit, an electrical engineering question, and then
mhm,
a chemistry question. So like
mhm,
a chem eng question.
mhm.
There were sections that had pieces of computer code in them, asking computer science questions. So the idea is that engineers are supposed to specialize. So if you're a mechanical engineer, you're not
Mhm.
necessarily going to answer the chemical problems or the electrical problems. You're supposed to leave those blank,
Understood.
rather than wasting all your time and energy trying to figure out what the answer to this thing that you didn't study was.
Mhm.
But I didn't know that going in, and I had studied a very broad array of engineering from across all the different disciplines. So I was just sort of gung ho and went in and was like, I can figure this out. And in some cases, I could.
Oh wow, I love that. Can you tell me? That leads me to my next question. Tell me about, well, what is nuclear engineering?
Nuclear engineering has to do with the creation of power systems that are powered by nuclear uh, reactions, I guess would be the best way to put it. So um, the primary form of power that people use the most is electricity, and pretty much all electricity gets produced in exactly one way, and that is by moving a magnet inside, moving a conductor inside a magnetic field very,
Oh,
very quickly.
yeah.
And so the basic problem is, where do you get the force to move that magnet around? So it could be done with air in windmills. That's how they work. There's a energy generator in there. It could be done with hydro. So you build a dam, so you get a bunch of high pressure water, and it drives a wheel, and that makes it happen.
Mhm.
It can be done with combustion. So natural gas, they build these basically huge jet engines, and the gas goes through and burns, and that drives the turbine, and the turbine drives the thing. But one option is that you can boil up water and then have that water, that expanded steam, drive a turbine. And when you're talking about heating it up, you can use fuel oil, use coal, or you can use a reactor pile that's exploiting nuclear fission.
Wow. And how do we use our regular electricity today? Like, is there water involved or how?
So in the United States, I think we're a little down at the moment, but we're probably somewhere between 10 and 12% of the electricity that we produce comes from nuclear power, which is about a third of what coal produces, for example. Um, and uh, and that the way that works, there's sort of two different kinds of plants that we use inside the United States. One's called a pressure water reactor,
Mhm.
and that's where the primary vessel is under so many pressure atmosphere that it doesn't actually boil. So there's just incredibly hot water circulating inside the primary vessel, and it is so hot that it actually boils water in the secondary loop that then goes out to drive things. The second one is called a boiling water reactor, where the water that's in the primary loop isn't as in pressure as high as a pressure water reactor, and in that case, it boils directly in the reactor vessel. Uh, that boiled steam is not used to drive turbine wheels because the risk of nuclear contamination is way too high. But uh, there's a much more thermally efficient way to get the heat out of that to then boil the next stage of water, and so that's how that works in those cases.
Does it matter if it's you know, ocean water or lake water? Does it matter? You know what I
Uh,
mean?
so it absolutely does, and in fact, the reason that they're located next to lakes or rivers,
Mhm.
and have those really big towers that have the steam coming out of them, that's the tertiary loop. So that's the water that cools off the water after it gets done with the turbine, and has nothing to do with the water that circulates inside the reactor. However, the water that circulates inside the reactor has to be very pure water. Well, not very pure water, but it cannot be things like salt water or ocean water,
Was it right?
because the pipes at those pressures and temperatures would be corroded in unacceptable ways.
Yeah. Okay, so the other question, if it's using electricity, did y'all ever learn about Nikola Tesla?
Not directly there, but yeah, I've run across knowledge of him, and in fact, speaking of that moving around things inside those systems, Tesla made real improvements to the alternating current generators that are involved in what we use today, and also laid out the basic plan for the electric motor, which we now have some considerable advances on. But for quite some years, pretty much all electric motors were using the Tesla design.
What about the electricity and the water? Because I want to know if the water would, are we wasting water in creating these electrical currents to create electricity? Because you say they steam up, and when they steam, they evaporate even under pressure. So are we evaporating our water supply?
Well, the primary coolant loop isn't going anywhere, and the secondary coolant loop isn't going anywhere either. The tertiary coolant loop, however, does get vented to atmosphere, and so that is a case where we are actually driving the water cycle, and this is not actually terribly uncommon. The old steam engines, if you've ever seen like a western and like fights over wells and stuff like that, the reason why that happened was, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, the way steam engines were designed to work is that the water expanded into steam in order to drive the piston, and then instead of being condensed and recooled, because that would have been a huge pain, that steam was just vented into the atmosphere. And then new water was then boiled up for the next stroke
Oh,
of the
that's
piston,
right.
and that's why you needed to stop for coal and water, because if the steam engine ran out of either one of them, it wouldn't go anymore. Um, Again, that's why it's quite frequent for large power installations, whether they're burning, carbon or burning neutrons, to be located near the site of a recurring or a large enough water source that it's not that big a deal. Um, However, the amount of water that's piled into the air by a plant that is sort of feeding, say, 10,000 households, um, isn't that far away and to the low side from what stands of trees will do, because trees actually pump enormous amounts of water into the air too as part of their respiratory process. So uh, it is it is a natural feature of our uh, hydrosphere, so called. And this is something that's introduced to children as something we call the water cycle, that water is evaporated or boiled into the atmosphere, condenses as it rises and cools, and then comes back down as rain, as a pretty ordinary consequence.
Now, can that be manipulated?
Oh, it absolutely can be. So one of the more famous cases had to do with the Chinese Olympics. So Beijing hosted the Olympics in this has been what, like 10, 15 years ago now at this point, quite some time, but actually much more than 10. It's like 15, maybe even 20. I can't remember which year it was, but at any rate, Beijing is pretty notorious for having really horrible air quality. And so one of the things that they did in the run up to the Olympics was not only by government fiat have a lot of the smokestacks of factories that were upwind of Beijing, and by upwind, I mean in some cases hundreds of miles away, shut down for weeks at a time so that they wouldn't have that pollution resident in the air. They also did an enormous amount of cloud seeding to cause rainfall to occur to cleanse the air. And so,
How do
uh,
you do cloud seeding? You know, I'm gonna ask you that, Noah. How do you do cloud seeding?
uh, well, basically, um, water droplets, in order to form rain and then clouds, need dust or other particulate matter to form the nucleus of their actions. And so, if you take airplanes up into the upper atmosphere with large, relatively inert, right-sized dust particles and release those dust particles into the upper atmosphere, they will help create cloud mass. And once cloud mass hits various critical features, then rainfall generally ensues. And so, with good fortune and a lot of time and effort, you can more or less force rain to happen.
Well said. And the chemistry table, do you think that we're going to be creating any more new chemicals to go in? I forgot what it's called. It's a chemistry table that
The
have
periodic table.
a
So,
periodic table.
so we actually have been detecting or making new entries to the periodic table. It's getting really, really tough, and it's also really, really defensible to claim that we aren't doing it, because these things exist for, in most cases, significantly less than a fraction of a second. Um, when you get up past things like uranium, you get to things that are very, very radioactive. So, for
Mhm.
example, plutonium, which is somewhat notorious and which does not occur naturally, for certain values of naturally. So, plutonium does occur as a result of natural processes in our universe, but since the Earth's been sitting around for a while, and the most stable form of plutonium has a half life of, I believe, 10,000 years, the amount of plutonium that would have been around at the beginning in, say, a million years would be reduced by a factor of 10 to the 30, which is a nonillion in English parlance. So basically, there wouldn't be any left after just a million years. And since we think the Earth formed billions of years ago, there would be much, much less than even that still lying around. And And so we can make plutonium, but the plutonium we make and the plutonium we have made is also radioactively decaying. And so every 10,000 years or so, half of it will have gone through a radioactive decay. There are other elements that are further down the periodic table from plutonium, and they get less and less stable. And a lot of the recently generated ones have half-lives that are in the hours range or less. Plus, the amount that we can create at a time is in the micrograms. So we make a little bit. We have very big, expensive detectors that confirm that properties exist in what we've made match up to what we expect, and then it's gone the next time you look. So whether or not that's making it, certainly not for commercial purposes.
Do you think that there, well said, do you think that there's chemicals on Earth, just Earth, probably the moon too, that have not been, seen yet that could be on the periodic table? What do you think for the future?
Not on the periodic table, strictly speaking.
Okay.
So the periodic table has to do with the electrical properties of the outer forms of the atoms, and
Okay.
it's complete. There's no cracks. So
Good.
barring some completely unexpected knowledge about how matter can be put together, there's not going to be anything new in the middle there. However, um, elements do have multiple isotopes, and experiments. There was some thought that there might be some experiments we could do that would allow us to create some other kinds of stable isotopes. My understanding is that those experiments are not going as well as we expected them to go, but it's not outside the realm of possibility that there's ways to pack a bunch more neutrons or a bunch fewer neutrons into some of these things and still have something that it acts like a lead atom or acts like a copper atom.
What, like, could you make a copper synthesize it and make, a synthesized copper? Do you get what I'm saying? You know how they synthesize stuff and make it
So,
copy?
so yes. So creating elements is still pretty darned expensive. We understand how to manipulate uh, the nucleus by exposing it and bombarding it with neutrons or protons or certain kinds of other radiation that will elicit those neutrons and protons to switch species among themselves.
Mhm.
However, that's a very hit and miss kind of job. It requires the atom to actually get hit by a single other particle
Mhm.
in the right way at the right energy, and
Understand.
so that produces numbers at very, very low rates. So, for example, tritium, which is a isotope of hydrogen that's 3 times heavier than regular hydrogen
Mhm.
um, is essentially only produced as a byproduct of nuclear sites, and has commercial uses. So glowing watch faces, glow in the dark watch faces, glow in the dark gun sights use tiny amounts of tritium. There's high vis like sign like sign paint for highways that uses tritium in it. Tritium has a half life of about 7 years, so it goes away. You'd have to refresh after a certain period of time. Tritium costs, I believe, about $3,000 a liter is the most recent number I've seen, um, and it is far and away the simplest of these things to produce. So copper being way, way further up in the periodic table, if there was some reason why it would be practical for us to make copper by, like, say, taking aluminum and just pelting particles into it until it was copper or something, um, the cost would be utterly prohibitive. So our native copper supplies would have to shrink to the point where this faux copper or manufactured copper would be way more valuable than anything that we use today, and that seems terribly unlikely.
because they don't use copper like that, except well,
Yeah.
how?
So to put this in perspective, there's a there's and it's been done. There's a reasonable way that you can basically bombard mercury with the right kinds of particles and turn it into gold. It isn't commercially viable, and it wouldn't be commercially viable even if gold cost 100 times what it currently costs, because it's unbelievably expensive and it makes not even microscopic, it makes less than nanoscopic amounts of gold at a time. So that's what you're up against.
Understood. What about you were talking about the plains in Beijing, China being a very polluted area. Now, I was thinking and thinking in the back of my head, and I said, chemtrails. Is that what it's called? The chemtrails, how they leave chemtrails to produce rain?
That's a different theory, in fact, but that is part and parcel of the same kind of idea. So cloud seeding is something that's gone on for decades. Chemtrails is a theory about
Understood.
a- airplanes being used for cloud seeding clandestinely, which
Understood.
may or may not be true. I
Great.
wouldn't know one way or another.
Well said. Okay, now back to China, and then we're going to move on. I found out that Z, like about 3, 4 years ago, that Z has his own sun in a laboratory. Is that true? And how would you be able to build a sun that's more powerful than the sun we have now and more powerful to have better missile power than the typical missiles that we have, nuclear missiles that we have today?
So you're talking about fusion power there, and there are a number of fusion reactor experiments going on around the world. It's actually, assuming that you don't really care about the fact that you're not getting energy out of it, there are desktop applications that will create small scale fusion. They won't create energy,
Uh-huh.
um, but if you basically create sort of a very very sharp cone and charge it and put that inside water, the because of the nature of how the electrostatic forces over the tip of the cone work, then that will create enough force to create, once again, nanoscopic levels of fusion at the tip of that cone. I read a paper about this, like 21 years ago at this point. Um, and they were using it in a lab as a very, very low grade neutron source. So fusing things isn't hard, strictly speaking. Getting energy out of fusion is hard. I am not aware that the Chinese experiments actually are anywhere near solar levels or anywhere near return. In fact, there was a fairly recent experiment which gained a lot of fame for actually producing more energy than it took to initiate. However, um, it didn't produce enough to be commercially viable. So the energy being produced, while it was slightly greater than the energy being put in, the amount of electricity that we'd be able to extract from that energy was still a pretty tiny fraction, even if we had been set up to extract electricity from it, which we were not. And scaling that up to the point where it produced amounts of energy that would be commercially viable for human beings to live on, we're nowhere close to those things right now. And unless some very different idea about how to extract that comes about, we will stay pretty far away. However, going to the second part of your question, making nuclear bombs more powerful, that actually is how we make nuclear bombs more powerful. So the H bomb tests, which, if you've seen images of nuclear bomb tests, you might have seen things like the Los Alamos things where they've got buildings that kind of fall over and look like they're flimsy, and some of those images. You might also see some of the Pacific Island tests where basically this sphere that looks like it's the size of a mountain shows up and engulfs an entire like island. Those were H-bomb tests, and you can use an ordinary fission style nuclear bomb, like the kinds that were developed in World War II, to trigger a fusion reaction. And that fusion reaction will release more energy than the triggering bomb puts in if you do it properly. And so that's one of the other things that we theoretically can use tritium for, is being part of that. It's known as a thermonuclear bomb at that point. Uh, uh, the tritium would form the energy source for the H in H bomb part of the explosion.
So basically, like it's a additive in some type of additive that goes to the regular bomb.
So um, I don't know how to explain this without getting technical. So I'll try to get as little technical as possible.
Yeah, break it down, Noah.
Right. So the way an ordinary bomb works, something like a hand grenade or something you'd use to collapse a building, is that it's chemicals that have a certain kind of instability, and when the chemical bonds are broken, the chemical converts from a solid, or in some cases a liquid, to a gas. And gases don't like being close to each other. And so the gas converts very rapidly into something that's hot and under a lot of pressure, and that pressure wave pushes out the vessel that it's around it, things that are next to it, and so on. And that expansion wave is the bomb.
Wow, that's
A
crazy.
fission device actually works in a very different way.
Uh-huh.
What's happening with the fission device is that radically faster than chemical bonds breaking down, there's a neutron chain reaction. So neutrons are released, which hit usually plutonium these days. The
Mhm.
plutonium breaks apart into a couple of atoms, but those two atoms are also hypothetically solid atoms. That there's not much chemical pressure for them to get away from each other, but an enormous amount of energy gets released. Thousands of times as much energy were released from that chemical bond breaking apart. And also some neutrons are released, and those neutrons go out and hit other plutonium atoms, which split apart and create more neutrons and more neutrons. And so there's this exponential expanding wave of enormous amounts of energy, and it's all photons. Basically, it's like x-rays, gamma rays, stuff like that. So essentially what happens is it's like somebody lit a light bulb that's so hot that the light bulb is just boiling away all the solids that are in the way. And so this wave of invisible high energy light goes out and gets absorbed by the physical matter that's around the bomb. And that physical matter doesn't chemically dissociate, it atomically dissociates and turns into plasma. And so just like the chemistry, the chemicals, once they turn into gases, wanted to get away from each other, when the individual elements of these atoms get dissociated from each other, they want to get away from each other. And so you get this much more powerful shock wave that's the after effect of this incredibly powerful light wave,
Mhm.
basically beyond boiling everything in a local radius. If some of the stuff that's in the local radius are these hydrogen atoms that have an ability to undergo fusion, when they get really super hot and start turning into plasma, instead of flying apart from each other, they will actually fuse together into helium. And that reaction releases even more energy than the enormous energy wave in the first place. It's just that it's hard to get to that because it needs to be, like that's what powers the sun, is that kind of reaction. It's got to be very hot and very dense in the first place. So we use the fission reaction to create a situation that's so hot and so dense that a fusion reaction can start, which then creates an even hotter and denser wave of photons that go out and create mass destruction.
Wow, I never knew that. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to skip a couple and go to the main questions I wanted to ask you because it's very important to me. So basically, I want to create a time machine by the time I'm 73. And we talked about this before the show. But before I talk about that, I want to ask you, did those three bounties get solved for math, you know, math?
Uh, no, no, no. There's been no Millennium Prizes solved in the last few months.
Okay, okay. So basically, I want to create a time machine by the time I'm 73. And I look at Facebook as being some type of time machine because but they don't go in the future. They talk about the past and the present. You can dip in the past and look at your old pictures with your friends and family, or you can go in the present and create something for the future. So I was wondering, what do you think about that? Because what I said to myself, in order to build a time machine, you would probably need some type of energy, kinetic energy that wouldn't blow you up or wouldn't melt you, and some type of wave. I was just thinking off the top of my head based on what I've seen on commercials and TV shows. So what do you think is
Well,
plausible?
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but there are really fundamental philosophical problems with the existence of time machines. If it's possible to actually travel back and forth, past and future, then you can violate causality. And once we violate causality, most of what we understand about physics sort of goes out the window. And so there are highly respected physicists who believe that the universe essentially has this kind of mechanism to slap down anything that would destroy causality and just cause it to not exist in the first place. And there's several science fiction stories that actually are on this subject. However,
Mhm.
there is a solution to Einstein's relativity equations
Okay.
that allows for a temporal backwards movement. Um, the way it works is that you have to have this cylinder,
Mhm.
that's infinitely long, but you can approximate that by sort of shaping it like a dumbbell,
Okay.
that has the mass of basically the black hole at the center of our galaxy. So way, way more mass than exists in the
Yeah,
solar system.
yeah, yeah.
And you have to spin it at speeds that are getting very, very close to light speed. And then there's orbits of this cylinder where you can go in and sort of slingshot around it, and you'll come out before you went in. Um, we
Wow.
don't think it's physically possible to actually build these things, but the math, that's the only like glimmer I can give you. Our
Understood.
current mathematics of relativity, which we know has flaws. Um, we don't know what they are, but we know that there are issues. Uh, uh, has that solution?
Well said. And I read in the paper that we are going to have 25 hours in a day, 200 million years from now. Do you think that that's plausible? Or is
Well,
it going
that's because of the moon.
to, okay, what can you
So
educate about that?
the moon, because we're in a co-orbit with the moon, that's very, very slightly unstable. The
Mhm.
moon is getting gradually further and further away from Earth, and as it gets further and further away from Earth, we're spinning slower and slower. So, like, if you ever seen, uh, like a ballerina, or like the ice thing in figure skating, when they're spinning and they start spinning with their arms way out, and then they pull their arms in so they spin really quickly. Or if you've done that yourself on a swing, twisted yourself up on a swing and like pulled yourself together so you'll spin faster and faster. If you have a spinning system, the closer together it is, the faster it is, the further apart it is, the slower it is. And so as the moon's orbit slightly widens, it causes this rate at which our entire system spins to slightly increase. And because the moon's tidally locked to the Earth, that changes the rotational period of the Earth as that system gets slower and slower. So yeah, I think an hour and a quarter mil is about right.
Okay. In 17 years of system development, have you contributed, which I know you have, anything, because he's worked 17 years in engineering, to match an algorithm or anything? Have you contributed, and what have you contributed?
Well, my major contribution is this patent that I'm working on. So I've come up with this way to create a consensus communication system where different agents, human beings, AIs, other things potentially, can communicate with each other in a way where they can all be aware of their common understanding of the fundamental situation.
Can you kind of elaborate, for give me an example of that?
Well, the primary example would be financial. So, if you have a marketplace, what price is doing is communicating among the people.
Mhm.
So, when prices go up, that's a signal to producers to make more because they'll make more money. So, if there's not enough bread, prices of bread go up, prices of wheat go up. Wheat farmers are like, hey, I got to stop growing turnips and start growing more wheat because people want wheat more than turnips now. And more wheat gets produced, the prices of bread comes back down, prices of wheat goes back down, and people are like, oh, I need to start eating more bread because it's cheaper to eat bread now. And so that price serves as the way that we communicate across an economy. Um, the difficulty is that that's all becoming much, much more complicated with the rise of global communication systems and computer communication systems. And so I've developed a way to mediate that price using a new system that is a lot more stable. And so uh, basically, rather than having to wait around to see these things happen, we can negotiate about the path the future is going to take. And so we can, instead of suddenly, discovering that you planted the wrong thing on your farm and then suddenly discovering that you need to change your diet, people can collaborate and sort of figure out how to tell people to plant the right stuff ahead of time by letting them know how much money they're going to make by doing different kinds of things.
This is huge. Have you, like, that? You should be in a White House for that. I mean, like, seriously, that is. I mean, who have you told about this?
Just about everyone I can get my hands on, actually. So that's the real challenge. People at the upper ends of society are very focused on their role in society, and I have not cracked the code of how to communicate to them as people and get their heads around what these sorts of consequences actually are. And so, for example, that's the patent struggle that I'm having. That's the note that you alluded to, which I'm very thankful you put up. I have a petition up. My patent is being held up by people in the government that the government's not allowed to talk to me about, and apparently isn't allowed to talk to Congress about either. Um, and I don't know what's going to happen with that. My case is pending before the patent court, and it will be heard July 2025. So I've got over a year before they'll even review, and then maybe the same set of people to whom I'm not allowed to communicate will once again put down a barrier.
Understood. I don't know many people, but I'm gonna tell your story to someone named Matthew, and he's a director, and he works for the government. And I want to ask them what could be done about that. You're in patent court, right? For this project, this beautiful project. It's
I'm
smoke.
I'm I'm heading there. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I'll be in touch with you. So we're about to get off. Tell me, where are you going in the future with everything you done contributed to society, man?
Well, I have a podcast talking about AI called The Fourth Age, the AI Revolution. And I've gotten some gigs and I'm looking for some more doing public speaking or training for people who are in industries that um, are technical but not AI focused, or aren't particularly technical and would like a soft introduction to what the actual utility and consequences of AI for their businesses might be.
In under 1 minute, because we got 4 minutes. Tell me, NVIDIA or Tesla robots, which one would you choose for the future?
Um,
You can say neither.
Neither. I think Boston Dynamics is doing a better job with robotics these days.
Understood. Boston Dynamics, you said?
Uh, they're they're they've been creating more impressive displays, and they've been in it longer.
Well said. And how can the people find you if somebody powerful is out there watching today? How can they find you, Noah?
Well, you can reach out to me directly. I've got my email, noahphealy@yahoo.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Noah Healy there. Uh, I'm also, as I said, I've got the podcast, Fourth Age. You can hear more about me on that, or find my website, CoordDisc, COORDISC.com. Uh, and yeah, if you'd like to show some support, head over to the petition, change.org, CDM_patent.
Well said. Stay on the line for just 1 second. You guys, Noah Healy, he done contribute over the past 30 to 35 to 40 years a lot to the industry, the scientific world, the engineer world, the mathematic world. Give him a round of applause. And if you're out there and you know how to change his patent or whatever you need to do to help him, just tune in and sit up there and write him. He's a wonderful guy. Take care, be safe, and I'll see y'all later.